Good afternoon. My name is Sarah Bleiler. I'm at Middle Tennessee State University. And this is my colleague, Winnie Coe. She's at Indiana State University. And today we'll talk a little bit about developing communal understanding of proofwriting criteria. So Winnie's going to take you through a little bit of the background and context for some of our work.
We still have two collaborators, and they are not be able to come to the conference. And Justin and Sean, we all develop and design this study together, and we implement this study into our course. So today we are going to share what we have done, and what we already found from our students. So for the background, when we ask undergraduate students about learning proof, sometimes they just think, okay, writing proofs involves specific procedures because they learn from the textbook or their professors, and they can apply the similar strategies for similar questions. And also they usually think that their instructors have the authority to judge whether or not their final work is correct. However, for mathematicians, they usually see proving is a social process because they can negotiate whether or not their argument is correct, and they usually use proof techniques or mathematical definitions that are known or accepted by their community. And also, in terms of teacher-centered instruction, it doesn't provide students with rich opportunities to engage learning proof as a negotiated sense-making process. So students just learn how to apply similar procedures to similar questions. In order to help students better learn proof, we draw these different ideas and think about how to provide students with opportunities so that they can learn proof that are similar to those of mathematicians. And also students can move away and see instructors do not have the only authority to judge whether or not their final product is correct or not. And also we would like to develop students' abilities to construct and evaluate mathematical arguments through learning proof as a communal, negotiated, and sense-making process. For the next of the slides, I would like to show you some quotes from our students. So Michael said, "I have no idea what separates good proofs from bad proof unless the proof is obviously wrong. The only proofs I have ever seen are in textbooks and are factually correct. So I don't know how one would be better than another other than by being simple and easy to understand." And also, Emily said, "In the past, I have learned to do proofs by watching someone else do a proof. I would try my best to emulate what they did on many different problems, but I still did not understand the process." And also, Kara said, for mathematical proofs during high school, they were few and far between. When we did by chance have them, they were complicated and not much sense was made. Hopefully, up until this semester, proofs were a foreign language to me. The only class that taught me any formal structure to proofs was geometry, but to form by own is a new concept to me. So Jessie said, "I learned proof most of what I learned about mathematical proof last semester. I learned what makes a good mathematical proof by writing bad ones and having my professor tell me that what I wrote was not logically or mathematically sound." So based this students' course, we know they did not have rich opportunities to learn proof. So we draw upon the definition of what proof means in school math in order for us to develop and design our instructional sequence. So basically, proof is connected to the community, so it should be produced and understood by the community members. So basically, proof should include statements accepted by the classroom community, and also proof should use modes of argument and forms of expressions that are accepted and known by the class community. And this slide talks about 4 of our instructional contexts. We implement our instructional sequence into two different types of courses. The first type is mathematical methods courses, and the second type is mathematical content courses. And also, we are from 4 different institutions. So for mathematical methods courses, Justin from University of New Mexico and I'm from Indiana State University. We all have pre-service secondary math teachers. They all have degree in mathematics or have taken a lot of pro-intensive courses. For mathematical content courses, Sarah from Middle Tennessee State University and Sean from California State Fulton University. Their courses are for math majors, including some pre-service secondary math teachers as well. So for our instructional sequence, we have different types of activities. The first one is the before class activity and the during class activity, and the last one is the after class activity. For the before class activity, you can see this handout Sarah already passed out. For the before class activity, pre-service students were asked to construct an argument for the sticking gum problem, and they need to submit their work by email to the instructor. And also they need to reflect on their previous experience with proof. For the during class activity, we as the instructor select a set of 5 different students' arguments to the sticking gum problem. And also during the class, students were asked to evaluate these arguments in small groups and as a whole class so that they were able to develop a set of criteria for writing mathematical proof. For the after-class activity, students were asked to evaluate and revise their original argument for the sticking gum problem based on the class-developed criteria. And also, they need to reflect on how this instructional sequence has the impact on their understanding of proof. So this is our instructional sequence, and for the rest of the slides, Sarah will talk about how we do the sequence, and also she will tell us some students' reflections.
Thank you, Winnie. So again, our major goal with this instructional sequence is really to help students see proof as something that can be negotiated and something that, that the community determines the validity of the arguments that are given. So we wanted them to have this experience of really negotiating one another's arguments and being able to see proof as something that makes sense and that there are reasons why we do certain things when we're proving. And not just to follow a particular format or to try to reproduce the instructor's argument. So that's really important for us in this instructional sequence. So let's hit the next one. So right now, what I'd like to ask you to do is look at the first of the 3 handouts that you've been given. That's called the before class activity. So we asked students outside of class to read through the sticky gum problem and answer question 1, which is generalizing the problem and providing a proof for that generalization. So we'd like you now to read through that problem. The rest of the questions there are just reflection questions that we had the students also address. So please just pay attention to the narrative on page 2 and question 1 on that page. And think about how your students might go about generalizing the problem and providing a proof for that. As you are finishing up reading the problem, if you're not in a group, if you can come and sit with a couple other people, we're going to ask you in this next part to discuss a couple things. All right, so again, you're not going to have time to go through and solve this problem, but we are hopeful that you have time to read through it and get an initial sort of thought in mind. What we'd like to do now is have you go to the during class activity packet. In that packet, what you'll find is 5 student arguments, and these were taken from my class. So we did this again at 4 different institutions, and each of us selected 5 arguments from the students in our own classes. Okay, so the arguments really came from the level and the types of students that were in our classroom community. Okay, so these 5 are coming from my class, which was an Introduction to Proofs course. And we'd like you to read through the first 3 arguments just because of time. Read through the first 3 arguments, and then on the last page, page 7, there's a proof assessment activity sheet. So for arguments 1 through 3, we would like you to check whether you believe the argument is a proof or not. and why. So just jot down some initial notes about why. So we'll ask you to do that individually. Take about 3 minutes, if you can, to do that individually. And then as a group, we're going to ask you to come together and try to write a list of proofwriting criteria based on some of your initial validations here. Okay, if you have not yet begun, I think some of the groups have started, which is great, but if you have not yet begun, I'd like to ask the person that's sitting closest to the stage to be the group's recorder. So on the back of your packet, if you could jot down for your group some of the criteria that you all have considered in terms of what does or does not make a proof here. So typically we would ask our students in their groups to first come to a consensus on all of these arguments. So some people would say yes, some would say no, and they'd have to actually argue and discuss and make their point about whether they thought an argument was or was not a proof. And then we ask them to jump to this next stage where they're writing out some of the criteria. Okay, so we'll ask the person closest to the stage just for about 3 more minutes to jot down some of the criteria that makes a valid argument, proof. All right. So again, I think we need a lot more time to discuss this criteria, but I'm going to ask us all to come back together here. Okay. So far I've heard some excellent discussion already about some of the criteria that you might consider if you were imagining yourself as a student reading some of these arguments. If you can see here, this is the criteria that was developed from our students in each of our separate classes. Okay. So just take a quick look up here. You'll probably see some of the things repeated across our classes and perhaps also on your papers. Okay. However, the criteria in each of our classes is different. Okay. And for us, that was really important, because our students are coming to us with varied backgrounds. They're coming to us with different levels of mathematical expertise, different levels of understanding what proof may be. And so we wanted this criteria to come from them. And this is an initial thing. In my class, we continued to discuss these criteria. We revised this rubric of sorts as we went throughout the semester. So this was revised as we went along, but this was their initial idea that came from their work. Okay, so you can take a quick look up here. All right, so again, we're bombarding you with handouts here, but we wanted you to get a full picture of really what we were trying to do in the class instructional sequence. So if you turn to the last packet, the after class instructional sequence, at this point in each of our classes, we asked students to fill out the rubric or the self-evaluation form on page 2. So recall they each individually had formed an argument for the sticky gum problem originally. And now what we asked them to do is, after our full group and class discussion developing these criteria, we asked the students to go through and write the class criteria, and on a scale of 0 to 5, how they think that their original argument addressed that criteria, and then explain their rationale for their numeric rating. Okay. So then the most important part for us was they went back and then revised their original argument based on that self-evaluation. Okay. So they had to go back, this was an iterative process, go back and really think about those criteria and how that was meaningful in the context of their original argument. Okay. For homework, for you guys, we'd like to ask you to review some of this sample work, and if you are interested in this type of activity, we love any feedback you have about what we might be able to do as next steps from here. Okay? So what you see the students doing in their revisions and how we might move them forward. Okay, so just a few quick things, reflections about what we learned from our students, what students learned through their reflections, sharing with us Several of them said that they thought that proof needed to follow a particular form before this activity. So here's a sample response. I was under the impression previously that proofs were subject to standard types of proofs, implying that a type of proof was to be chosen and a strict format to be followed. In this activity, there's a format, but it's much less flexible than I initially thought, requiring key elements instead of outlines. So the students focused on the argument and the rationale for the argument rather than the strict format that they should be following. Also, many of the students recognized, and you can see here some of them were focused on the empirical argument, so proof by example, and many of them realized that that was not sufficient. So at the end, this student said a proof has to hold true for every possible situation. So that was something that Mona took from this. Also, proof for many of these students was just sort of an academic endeavor, something that professors do in front of the classroom, and it didn't have as much meaning for them. So Peter, in my class, shared, before class I had viewed proof writing as a purely academic endeavor that had little or no real-world application. Not to sound bitter, but in previous classes the process of proof seemed like a large amount of academic back-patting and teachers saying, hey, look at me, I can do this really complicated piece of math. We will have these slides available for you. You can contact me if you put up the email address, Winnie. Okay. You all can contact me or Winnie, and we'd be happy to share with you some of our final reflections beyond what the students had shared with us. So thank you.